Have you ever sensed it without quite knowing how to name it? Conversations with people who came of age in the 1990s often feel slightly different. The tone is calm. The pace is measured. Nothing dramatic stands out, yet something in the interaction feels unusually steady. They listen fully before answering. Silence does not make them uncomfortable. They remain present without signaling that they are being present. At first glance, it is easy to assume this is simply personality. Maybe they are naturally quiet. Maybe they are relaxed by temperament. Maybe they are less absorbed in online culture. But those explanations miss the deeper pattern. The difference has less to do with personality and more to do with timing. People born during the 1990s developed their sense of self during a technological shift that human psychology had never encountered before. Their earliest years unfolded in an environment where attention moved slowly and interaction required patience. Then, while they were still forming habits of thinking and relating, the world around them accelerated. What you may be noticing is not detachment, and it is not nostalgia. It is regulation. Their nervous systems learned how to sit with their own thoughts before they learned how to constantly broadcast them. Conversation does not need immediate validation to feel real. Attention does not require constant stimulation to stay engaged. Once you begin to recognize this pattern, it becomes difficult to ignore because it quietly influences how they handle silence, how they engage with technology, and how they build relationships long after childhood. People who grew up in the 1990s occupy a psychological position that few generations fully share. They are neither entirely analog nor fully digital. Instead, they matured during the narrow passage between the two. Their early environment moved slowly enough to feel stable. Communication required intention. Relationships demanded effort. Chimi had gaps. If you wanted to see a friend, you arranged it in advance. If you needed information, you searched carefully and waited. If you missed something, it simply disappeared. Then the pace of life changed rapidly. Digital technology did not settle in gently. It expanded quickly. Speed became the default expectation. Constant availability became normal. Visibility turned into social currency. And this entire shift occurred while this generation was still developing its identity. That is what it means to grow up as a bridge generation. A bridge exists between two landscapes, yet fully belongs to neither. Its role is connection. Psychologically, that role carries pressure. People shaped by the 1990s learned to navigate two different systems at once. They move easily through digital environments, yet they still recognize a kind of depth that constant connectivity struggles to reproduce. They appreciate convenience, but they remember the effort they used to accompany it. They embrace progress, yet they remain aware that progress often involves trade. Living between these two worlds created adaptability, but it also introduced tension. They understand both sets of rules. One system rewards speed and constant visibility. The other values patience and presence. Balancing both inevitably shapes how they think about time, connection, and identity. To understand this generation, it helps to recognize that they were never meant to settle fully on one side. Their experience was defined by carrying both perspectives at once. For those who spent their childhood in the 1990s, life unfolded without a permanent record. Daily moments existed only once. There was no pause button and no digital archive waiting online. Saturday morning cartoons aired at a fixed time. If you missed them, they were gone. Family gatherings happened without dozens of cameras documenting every angle. Awkward mistakes faded with time rather than remaining searchable years later. Joy lived entirely in the moment because there was no expectation that it needed to be captured, posted, or publicly validated. Over time, this environment quietly shaped the nervous system. Attention settled more easily into the present because the present was the only place experiences could exist. Being present was not something people practiced intentionally. It was simply how life worked. When experiences cannot be stored or replayed, attention stays where the experience is happening. The mind does not divide itself between the moment and the idea of documenting it. Nothing in the background is asking how this will appear later or how others might judge it. This is not nostalgia. It is a psychological pattern. A nervous system that develops without constant observation becomes anchored internally. Experience does not need external validation to feel meaningful. Presence does not need to be displayed in order to exist. When digital tools eventually introduced constant recording and sharing, this generation approached them from a different baseline. They could adopt the technology, but their sense of attention did not rely on it. Silence still felt natural. Experiences still felt complete without witnesses. That early environment quietly trained a specific form of attention. It stays with what is happening rather than splitting into two streams. One stream experiences the moment. The other imagines how the moment might be presented. That difference still appears today in how many of them listen, how they remember events, and how fully they occupy the space they are in. For people who spent childhood in the 1990s, boredom did not disappear instantly. It arrived and remained. There was no continuous feed of stimulation available in a pocket. No algorithm stepping in the moment attention dropped. When boredom appeared, there were only two options. Sit with the discomfort or create something from the empty space. That is where imagination began to work. Children invented games. They wandered through daydreams. They replayed conversations and scenarios in their minds. They learned how to occupy their own thoughts without outside input. Over time, this process trained more than creativity. It trained emotional regulation. When distraction is unavailable, the nervous system learns how to calm itself. It learns that discomfort rises, peaks, and eventually fades without requiring immediate escape. Psychologists have long noted this pattern. Research from the late 20th century on attention and self-regulation shows that children who learn to tolerate small amounts of boredom often develop stronger internal coping skills later in life. The brain becomes familiar with the rhythm of emotional waves rather than trying to interrupt them instantly. This ability is rarely named, yet it shapes everyday behavior. It allows someone to be alone without anxiety. It allows waiting without agitation. It allows restlessness without needing immediate stimulation. Today, boredom is often treated as a signal that something is wrong. The solution arrives quickly through endless content. But for this generation, boredom served a different role. It acted as a teacher. It revealed that the inner world could sustain attention on its own. That is one reason many people who grew up in the 1990s are comfortable with quiet. Silence does not signal emptiness. It signals space. When the outside world becomes still, the inner world becomes active. This relationship with boredom shapes thinking, coping, and self-awareness long after childhood. It influences how someone handles solitude and how easily they can remain present without needing constant stimulation to feel alive. Waiting also formed a quiet part of daily life, not as a deliberate lesson, but as an unavoidable condition. Movies required a trip to the video store. If the tape was already rented, you returned another day. Songs arrived on the radio at unpredictable moments. You waited and hoped the disc jockey would let the introduction play without interruption. Allowance money accumulated slowly before it became a compact disc or a game cartridge. Desire rarely produced immediate fulfillment. Time stood between wanting and receiving. Psychologically, this repeated delay shaped how the nervous system understood reward. Delayed gratification is not only about patience, it is about trust. Trust that something valuable can exist without being immediately consumed. Trust that anticipation can deepen motivation rather than destroy it. Experiments by psychologist Walter Mischel at Stanford University during the 1970s and later follow-up studies found that the ability to wait for a larger reward often correlated with stronger long-term planning and emotional stability. The brain learns that desire can survive a waiting period. For people shaped by those conditions, the pattern often continues into adulthood. Goals are approached with a longer horizon. Progress that unfolds slowly does not immediately feel like failure. In relationships, this can appear as emotional patience. Connection develops gradually rather than through urgency. They do not rush emotional closeness or demand constant reassurance. Bonds grow over time through shared experience rather than through urgency. This ability to move comfortably between silence and interaction reflects a nervous system trained in two different environments. It can rest when nothing is happening, and it can engage when communication begins. This ability to remain steady both offline and online reflects a nervous system that learned balance before the world began moving at its current speed. That balance is unusual today, and it explains why adaptability often appears as one of the defining strengths of people shaped during the 1990s. They grew up adjusting continuously. As technology accelerated and social expectations shifted, they learned to translate between systems, recalibrate habits, and adapt their behavior without much guidance. Adaptability became second nature. Yet adaptability carries a cost that is rarely discussed. When someone learns early to manage challenges independently, they often become skilled at regulating themselves, while becoming less practiced at expressing their needs. Discomfort is handled quietly. Pressure is absorbed internally rather than signaled outward. Over time, this creates a visible pattern. From the outside, they appear composed, resilient, and self-sufficient. Others may describe them as calm, low maintenance, or unaffected. But that perception can hide the amount of internal effort required to maintain that stability. Because they adapted early, many rarely announce when something feels heavy. They adjust again. And again. The strength is real, but the strain often remains invisible. There is also the psychological cost of living between two environments. Being fluent in two different systems of attention can mean fully belonging to neither. They understand the pace of modern life, yet something about it still feels slightly out of rhythm. They remember depth while operating in systems that reward speed. This creates a quiet form of displacement that is difficult to explain. It does not reflect disconnection. It reflects complexity. One of the hidden burdens of adaptability is delayed recognition. When others see competence, they assume ease. But inside, there's often fatigue from constantly recalibrating two environments that rarely slow down. Recognizing this cost does not weaken the strength. It simply acknowledges what that strength required and what it continues to demand. Many people who grew up during the 1990s describe a subtle feeling that is difficult to define. It is not burnout, and it is not pessimism. It is more like the sense of having witnessed more change than their age would suggest. They sometimes feel older than they are, not because they matured too quickly, but because they watched an entire cultural rhythm shift while they were still learning how to belong within it. They remember when daily life moved at a human pace, attention was less fragmented. Social expectations were slower and more predictable. Privacy existed without effort. Then, within a single lifetime, those patterns changed. Speed replaced rhythm. Visibility replaced privacy. Constant adjustment replaced stability. Transitions of that scale leave a psychological imprint. When someone remembers a world that no longer exists, they carry a form of emotional gravity. It is not sadness exactly. It feels more like weight, the awareness that something meaningful disappeared even as useful innovations appeared. This story is not about one generation being better than another. It is about timing. People born during the 1990s are not slower than the world around them. The world simply accelerated. Recognizing that pattern is not about longing for the past. It is about understanding the present. If parts of this description feel familiar, there's nothing broken about you. You are not behind the world. You simply carry a rhythm that formed in a different environment. That rhythm can still be valuable even when the surrounding pace changes. And if you did not grow up within that transition, recognizing it can deepen empathy. What sometimes looks like distance is often balance. What appears to be slowness is often steadiness. If these ideas helped you recognize something about yourself or someone close to you, you are not the only one noticing it. This channel explores the quieter psychological patterns that influence how we think, connect, and move through life. If you found the discussion meaningful, consider subscribing so you can follow future conversations. And if any part of this reflection resonated with your own experience, share your thoughts in the comments. Someone else may read your perspective and realize they are not alone in feeling this way. Thank you for spending this time here.